Guard to police its southern border, but Democratic senators are criticizing the deal for a lack of detail. Not really a new issue, and offering nothing significantly, like I said, new on the table. President Trump is expected to release more details in the coming days.
And those trade tensions almost derailing the G20 finance ministers' communique. Nancy Hungerford joins us live from Fukuoka, Japan. And Nancy, great to see you. And you did cover a lot of ground with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and we look forward to that interview. Net, what do people think about the chance of a landmark deal or otherwise happening towards the end of this month?
Shri, I can tell you the finance ministers we spoke to here in Fukuoka are very concerned. They, of course, are hopeful that a compromise can be reached at the G20 meeting in just a few weeks now in Osaka, with that meeting between President Trump and President Xi. But there's a lot of tension and concern that there won't be a landmark deal, as you put it. And that's very important. We did have a chance to talk to Secretary Mnuchin about what the bar would have to be. I mean, how much success out of that meeting do we need to get in order to avoid the next tranche of tariffs, talking about some $300 billion worth of goods coming from China into the U.S. He didn't quite say there would have to be a landmark deal or even a deal signed. He did say they would need some indication that the Chinese side was ready to move forward on their terms. And that was a theme that Secretary Mnuchin talked about quite a bit here in G20. He is asking the Chinese side to come back to the table on the terms of the negotiation where he believes they were before talks fell apart. So I had a chance to ask Secretary Mnuchin, what did go wrong? Take a listen.
I'm not going to speculate on what went wrong. Since Buenos Aires, under the leadership of both presidents, we made enormous progress. I think we had a deal that was almost 90% done. China wanted to go backwards on certain things. We've stopped negotiating, and I just had a very candid discussion with Governor Yi. Governor Yi has been part of the negotiating team, and again, we made some preparations in advance of a meeting for President Trump and President Xi.
Okay.
If China wants to move forward with the deal, we're prepared to move forward on the terms we've done. If China doesn't want to move forward, then President Trump is perfectly happy to move forward with tariffs to rebalance the relationship.
Did you get an indication from the PBOC governor that China does want to move forward?
We had a private conversation, and it was a very candid and constructive conversation about the meeting for the two presidents, but I'm not going to go into the details. And
will there be any meetings before the meeting between the two presidents? Are you perhaps about to divert your plane to go to Beijing after this?
No, I don't expect that to be the case.
Can you give us a better idea, though, of what you talked about with the PBOC Governor Yi Gang on the currencies in particular? Are you worried that China is going to weaponize their currency, at least use it to their advantage in this fight?
No, I don't think that's the case, but I do think their currency has been under pressure as a result of what's going on in their economy and the risk to them of these trade issues. There's no question that as we put on tariffs, people will move their manufacturing outside of China into other areas, and that's going to have a very negative impact on their economy, and I think you see that reflected in the currency.
So you think it is a natural weakening of the currency rather than a deliberate manipulation?
I do think it's a natural weakening of it.
We talk about non-tariff barriers, too. A lot of U.S. companies, around 50%, I believe, in a recent AmCham survey, talked about their concern. They've already seen non-tariff barriers to trade. We've also seen the situation around FedEx, which is also tied to Huawei. Are you starting to see more areas of concern among non-tariff barriers, and have you spoken to your Chinese counterparts about this?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the FedEx situation, but what I would say is in negotiating our agreement, one of the big parts of the agreement has always been about non-tariff barriers, is about forced technology transfer. These are very important issues to us and critical to any agreement. So these are issues we've made a lot of progress, and any agreement we have will need to be certain that that's included.
So there you have it, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin there explaining what he took away from his latest meeting with the PBOC Governor Yi Gang. And I think it's critical there, Shri, to make this distinction between what he sees in the currency weakening and what he doesn't see, which is outright manipulation. Because just before we did that interview, the day before, in fact, Secretary Mnuchin had said that it's no coincidence the currency had been weakening, that is the renminbi, amid these heightened trade tensions. And many took that to mean that he was accusing them of let it weaken. So that's why I wanted to make this point very clear. After he spoke to the PBOC governor, I think his tone was a bit more soft than some would have expected. He thinks ultimately the weakness we've seen in the currency is down to what's going on with the slowdown, which is in part, of course, tied to these trade tensions, and then the stimulus and easing measures that the Chinese government is taking. But of course, the big takeaway in that exchange specifically is that if talks don't go the way in which President Trump intends them to at G20 in Osaka, he is very happy to move forward with additional tariffs. Sri?
Yeah, just on the currency issue, I'm sure the Treasury Secretary's boss would beg to defer on that moderate tone that seemed to come out in the interview with you. But on to the million-dollar question, and that is what's really vexing the markets. What happens with the second tranche, with the remaining 300 billion or so of Chinese imports? Are they going to be tariffed? What sort of sense did you get from the Treasury Secretary?
Right.
Because it's very clear here that the administration continues to use tariffs as leverage in this trade dispute.
Yes, and in fact, you can actually look at the situation with Mexico and say it worked. So perhaps now the administration feels emboldened that tariffs are a productive tool, even if they're not a favorite tool among those in Congress. And certainly many here in Fukuoka had concerns about the way in which tariffs are being used for national security reasons. But for the time being, the administration seems to think that tariffs are a productive tool. I will say, though, Sri, that when I asked specifically about what needs to be accomplished to avoid those next round of tariffs going through, Secretary Mnuchin didn't say that it was a done deal. I mean, he said as long as those talks are constructive, as long as President Trump feels as though the Chinese are committed to moving forward, then perhaps we could be looking at a delay. And I think that is critical. We'll play you some of that from the interview coming up in a little while, because he was holding out the possibility that even if they aren't taken off the table completely, that there could be a postponement until they can actually get a deal done. The question is whether or not that is sufficient for the markets to be relieved as well. Back to you for now.
Yes, the fact that the tariff threat is still hanging over these talks doesn't make the atmospherics any better, does it, Nancy? Thank you very much indeed for that. Right, let's bring it back to the markets. And New Zealand, as always, first out of the gate. And let's take a look and see if it is keying off a stronger Wall Street that we saw on Friday. S&P NZX 50. Let's call it stable, just above 10,000. Australian markets will remain shut today for a holiday. Japan, though, starts trade in 2 hours. And this is how the Nikkei performed in the prior session on Friday. Constructive, 20,884. The dollar-yen rate looking very interesting as well. So we've got a stronger dollar, weaker yen, 108.50 there. So the weaker yen story, at least today, should bode well for Japanese equities, especially the exporters, Tanvir.
Shri, after the break, we'll discuss how the latest trade developments could shape the trading week ahead in Asia. Gareth Nicholson from the Bank of Singapore joins us in a little while. As we head for a break, take a look at how U.S. futures are shaping up right this moment, seeing a bit of a green tech uptick, actually, at last count. Take a break then.
I'd like to donate these books.
Thank you very much.
Where'd you get that book?
A man donated it.
Yes?
I'm sorry, but I need to retrieve
I don't leave you looking for this.
No. Thank you so much.
Return the book.
During Melania Trump's UN speech today, she spoke out against bullying, and then her husband took the stage to give the rebuttal.
Late Night with Seth Meyers. this weekend.
A woman demanding we all do better.
People will continue getting smarter and being better people and hopefully care about each other more and call out abuse of power.
A whistleblower that shook Hollywood to its core.
I think Hollywood is a very